Motherfucker. All right. Sorry to everyone who is coming into the motherfucker. Anyway, welcome to episode number 97 of the NerdProQuo podcast. My God, it would not be a solo episode if at least one thing didn't go wrong. The first time I tried to record this, my computer decided to restart itself. This is going to be a review of the premiere of the Preacher pilot, the Preacher pilot on AMC. But before we get to that, because it's appropriate that I got angry with my computer restarting, because I have a lot of thoughts about Preacher. In the meantime, before we get to that, just the quick plugs, the most important of which is we are 3 episodes away from the 100th episode, and there is now a location and time and date for the live show of the 100th episode, and that is going to be June 24th at 7 p.m. at 739 Franklin Avenue. It is a bar right here on Franklin Avenue, so you should come out to that. It is technically free. I am going to put out, it is a $5 suggested donation and a $1 minimum, if only because I had to rent out the back room in order to do this show. So for those of you audience members who are coming in and doing that, I would greatly appreciate a donation and also a drink purchase. But if you have to make a decision on one or the other, go with the drink purchase. In any event, we are also going to have a thing that I'm bringing back from when I used to do the head injury show. Those of you who are friends of mine, before I started the podcast, I used to do a show called the Head Injury Show about once a month. I might be restarting that under a different name, but the Bucket of Crap is going to make a reappearance. Just to explain to those of you who don't know what the Bucket of Crap is, the Bucket of Crap is almost literally what it says. It's a bunch of crap that a bunch of us have found in our apartments that we no longer want or that we have doubles of, and we are giving out to you, the audience. A lot of times the Bucket of Crap is crap is actually full of stuff that is not crap. So if you come out to the show, be sure to peruse the Bucket of Crap when you come in, unless it's during the show. If you don't do that, if you don't get there earlier and peruse the Bucket of Crap, because, first come, first served, early bird gets the cool shit. But usually what I do with the Bucket of Crap is I hold a couple of things that are going to be given out during a period in the show. So, yeah. We're going to have that. I'm going to be releasing the list of both the performers, which I have not confirmed all of them yet, but there's definitely going to be... It's all former guests on a podcast, so you can probably make some guesses. It's a couple of comedians, a couple of poets, and at least one musical guest. So you can peruse the older episodes and try and guess who's going to be there. I will be releasing the full list of confirmed performers in a little bit and sending out the big invite for that. But it is June 24th, 7 p.m. to around 9 p.m., and then I'm probably going to be continuing an after party at a yet-to-be-disclosed location. But I will be releasing the performers list and some of the more exciting things in the Bucket of Crap a little bit later. Also, just a quick plug, the Union Square Slam is still going on. It is no longer a slam, or at least for the summer, as a $5 cover. That's Bureau of General Services Queer Division in the LGBT Community Center. Because I haven't done this in a couple weeks, I'm forgetting what the address is, but it's on 13th Street. You can Google it, the Bureau of General Services Queer Division. That is 7 p.m. That is a $5 cover. Yeah, go check that out. Also, every Friday, Living Room Comedy Show at the Postmark Cafe in Park Slope, Brooklyn. That is 6th Street between 4th and 5th Avenue. So let's get into this. So a couple things you need to know before I get into this about Preacher and about me and Preacher. Preacher is one of my favorite comic books, possibly comic book series of all time. I read it at a very formative time during my childhood, right around when I was a teenager, which I think, a lot of things that you become very attached to when you are a teenager. You really look forward to and you get really scared when these things get adapted for television or for movies, especially if you're like a super nerd like me. And when I saw the preview a couple of months ago, I was not excited. I, like many people who are big fans of the comic book, was very, very pissed off. And short story on that, before I get into some of the details about this, because I am going to backtrack a little bit on the rant of hate that's about to happen. So if you're not a fan of rants of anger and hate, you might want to skip this episode, although it will give you a primer, I believe, if you haven't watched this show, about whether you can watch the show, whether I would recommend it. I will get to that in a second. Here's what I'll say. When I saw the preview, I was not excited. It looked like they were ignoring a lot of things, and it looked like a piss-poor adaptation of the comic book, and that was basically confirmed by the pilot. But that being said, here's what I'll say: if you have zero familiarity with the comic book at all, I think you could come into this and really enjoy that pilot. Like, it was I'm not gonna lie, like, it was really well done. If you have no familiarity with the comic book, you would probably have enjoyed it. As I was live tweeting, many people did very much enjoy it. They were very intrigued by it. And I tried, when I watched it initially, I was too full of rage. That's why I waited to record this, aside from the fact that I'm trying to, like, stretch out the couple of episodes until the 100th episode. But I watched it again to try and see it with the eyes of just like, okay, let me not think of it as an adaptation. It's kind of like, there are two things that I compare it to. Well, one thing actually really comes to mind, however you might feel about this movie. It reminds me of the Constantine movie, which is like, that movie, however you might feel about it, can be an enjoyable time if you completely ignore and forget the fact that there was ever a comic book. I think you have to do the same thing with the Preacher TV series. And just, if you haven't read the comic book, spoilers on a lot of things, because I'm going to discuss a lot of things that I think they got wrong, a lot of things that they changed that I don't understand the decision why they... There was a lot of... Here's what I'll say. I am usually not a nitpicker. I don't really care about changing details. Like, I wasn't expecting a page-per-page adaptation of the comic book, although that would have been fucking great. And there was no way they would have been able to do it on AMC. They would have had to done it on a channel like HBO. That probably would have been a better choice, but whatever. But this is one of those things where there was so much that they ignored. Basically, just maybe they'll get to it in later episodes, although I don't know how, because of the way they've set it up. Is basically the entire first couple issues, the first trade of Preacher, they've almost completely ignored. So if you read the comic book and you're expecting to see anything, really anything, from those that first like arc of Preacher, you're gonna be disappointed. You're gonna be angry. You're gonna be me, basically, watching it. And the biggest problem I have with this is that actually, as a pilot, just for a TV show, it's actually pretty good. Like, it's a really good pilot for a show not called Preacher. And that is the central problem. There's some main plot things that I think I don't understand why they changed. Number one, if you've ever read the comic book series at its core is more of a road trip series than anything else. And I don't fucking understand why they want to do this. But they basically, Evan Goldberg and Seth Rogen, decided that they want to keep what I'm guessing, and I'm pretty fucking sure they're going to do this. I'm sorry, I'm like dropping a lot of F-bombs, because apparently I'm still angry about this, is they're going to keep it in the town that he's in. In the comic book, the town lasts about an issue, maybe? before that scene at the end of the pilot. Once again, if you haven't seen the pilot, spoilers. If you haven't read comic book, spoilers. The end of that sermon that he gives uh, at the end of the pilot in the comic book series, he's basically decided he's going to leave, and that's when that force that you see, which in the comic books is called Genesis. I won't get into the plot points of exactly what Genesis is, but he gets possessed by that, and when that happens, basically it detonates like this almost nuclear explosion in the town, and basically wipes out everyone in the town except for Jesse. And Tulip and Cassidy don't show up till after that. Tulip is that part is kind of accurate. Tulip is coming back to that town to look for Jesse because Jesse ran out on her. I'm guessing maybe they'll get into the reasoning behind that on the show, and they may go into his past, and we'll get. I really doubt they're gonna have TC and the other character, who for some reason I am basically Grandma and her henchmen. I don't know how they're gonna handle that. Whether they'll handle it at all. Like, there's no way. I can't predict anything, which is, I guess, is a good thing. But it's also like why, if you were going to ignore this much about the comic book, why even call it an adaptation? Why even bother fucking calling it Preacher? Like, dude, like Evan Goldberg, Seth Rogen, why not just do your own show? Like, why adapt a comic book if you're not gonna use any of the source material? I mean, they kind of kept the tone. Like, changing around the order of things, the basic story is fine, but there are just certain things like keeping it in a town, introducing characters that don't show up till later, like Arseface, which of course they don't call him Arseface on the show, but if you've watched the pilot, you know which character Arseface is. And it just seems like there were a lot of decisions to change things that didn't need to be changed, and also I don't understand like the decision to change them. It just doesn't seem. It's like there doesn't seem like I understand if you're changing things because for like comic books it's like this doesn't really work in this medium, but there are a lot of things like, and a lot of that has to do with like budgets and effects, and these don't seem to be those kinds of decisions. This just seems to be. It really does seem like Evan Goldberg and Seth Rogen just went like, we like this comic book. We like the tone. We like the humor and the violence. And we want to adapt it. But we don't like it enough that we want to actually take that much from the source material. We just want to do it's like, we like this concept. Let's just, let's take this concept and do whatever we want with it. Because that seems to be the takeaway. I mean, I read some of the interviews with them. They're like, the takeaway from the comic book that they seem to have had. It's like, anything can happen in this comic book, which they seem to have read as, well, that means on a TV show, we can do anything we want and get away with it, including completely and utterly ignoring the source material. Like, I don't fucking understand why. I hate being this person, okay? Because I really don't have a problem with adaptations where they change a lot from the source material, so long as they keep the core of the characters. And there's aspects about the backstories of some of the characters that they've changed that I don't. That character-wise, like, I think a lot of the characters are intact. Like Jesse, at least in the beginning, is the Jesse Custer from the comic books. He's kind of like this preacher who has come back, but like not really. He's not really himself. Cassidy is the vampire, the Irish vampire that he is in the comic books. Although for some reason they decided in the comic books he's a loner, pretty much. A lot of that has to do with the fact that he's a vampire and immortal, and the last immortal he encountered, the last vampire he encountered, ended up being kind of a prick, like an asshole who he didn't like. So he's mostly a loner, and he doesn't like having friends because he doesn't like watching all of his friends die. And it just seems like In the show, they've ignored that too. Like they have him like he's calling up someone on the phone. It's like apparently who's also like Irish, and it's just like, no, wait, he's not. He thinks he's for a really long time. He thinks he's the only vampire. He doesn't have other vampire friends. Like what the fuck are they doing? That's not his character. Also, Tulip, who Ruth Negga I love in this, but that's not Tulip either. Like, and a lot of that has to do with who her father is. Like the fact that she doesn't like guns. Like, it's just in the comic books, Cassidy and Tulip meet first, and the only reason why Cassidy tags along with Tulip is because he thinks he's like, oh shit, like in the comic books, a similar kind of thing happens with Tulip that happens in this series, but like she takes a job and the job kind of goes south, and Cassidy kind of witnesses it and goes like, oh, you look like you might be fun to hang out with. I'm going to go on this while you go look for your ex-boyfriend. And so they have Tulip come back, and the interesting thing about Tulip is that that is Tulip in the show, and it's also not Tulip. And I want to make this absolutely clear, I'm not talking about her race. Actually, a person I brought up, I've name checked once or twice on the podcast, Scott Woods, who writes about nerdy stuff too, and writes really cogent, like amazing stuff. Like if you get a chance, go look up his. I think it's Scott Woods Makes List of Things, I believe is the website, and he brought up this really interesting thing about that normally under normal circumstances, like he doesn't mind, and he also like embraces like when they change the gender or the race of characters. But he brought this really interesting point, which is that changing her race now puts, even if it's not intentional, puts the focus on certain things and also calls attention to her race in ways that he, and if I'm paraphrasing this wrong, Scott, forgive me if I am, because I will probably tag you in this podcast and be like, I name checked you. That it almost forces that to be dealt with as an issue in a way that he is afraid that the show isn't prepared to actually handle effectively. Like that the quote unquote weight of that is something that he thinks they're not going to handle well, and because of all the other stuff dealing with religion and also with race, because race is dealt with in the comic book, it's not going, like he doesn't exactly, he said he was like scared or whatever that the show couldn't bear the extra weight of that as well, which is a thing I hadn't even thought about, because honestly I didn't think about them changing like her race. I was just like, okay, cool, whatever. Again, like a decision, like I don't know why they made it. I don't have a problem with it. It just seems like, okay, cool. I mean, that's a decision. But then there were so many other things piled onto it that was just like, okay, that seems like a thing that you may or not have to deal with later in the show, and I don't know. And now I'm worried. I don't, especially based on the pilot, have faith. Interesting choice of words, that they will handle that either skillfully or well, and I'm a little scared about that. Also, just the fact that, like, I don't know who that was in her apartment, whether that was supposed to be her dad, because in the comic books, her dad is dead, and the reasons behind his death, while very funny in the comic books and kind of a satire in the comic books, are the reason why she doesn't like guns now. And it seems like there's a lot of stuff they're ignoring or changing about the past of the characters in order to fit the model of, hey, we wanted to do whatever the fuck we want with the show. Like, we're just going to change all these things about the characters' backstories so that, like, you know, we can do what we want to do with the show. And it just, there's side characters where there's all these like little side characters, like the woman who very clearly has a crush on Jesse, and her kids, whose apparently husband has left her. I know she's gonna be a side character, and this is a comic book in which the supporting characters are great, but these are supporting characters that weren't in the comic books, and I don't know why they're there. I know why they're there, but I just don't know why they chose to have them as supporting characters. They just added supporting characters from the town, and it's just like, oh, fuck, I don't. This isn't that story. This isn't that story. This isn't a story about a preacher in a small town. That's not what this preacher is about. It's a road trip about a guy who gets possessed by this thing, and there's a whole thing in the show that they do address about, like, one of the characters praying to God, and God used to talk to him, and now he doesn't. And the whole premise is that God has left heaven, and Jesse wants to go looking for him now that he has, like, this Genesis in him. He wants to go looking for God and find out why God left heaven, which in its central premise of the comic book is a road trip, and they chose not to do that for the pilot, and it made me very angry. But whatever. But like I said, if you knew nothing about the comic books and you saw Jesse and Cassidy, there's actually a great scene. It's very cool on an airplane with Cassidy. His intro is great. Tulip's intro is great. In the show, on the show, if you have no familiarity with the comic book, like, it's actually pretty cool. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I was like, there's a lot of really cool stuff there. It's just, as someone who's so attached to comic books, I'm still, even after watching it twice and letting it kind of sit and not be angry about it, I'm still angry about it. I'm still going to watch the second episode. As for whether I can recommend that you watch the show, if you've never read the comic book, depending on where you fall on certain religious things, you'll enjoy it, I think. If you've read the comic book, if you're not that attached to the comic book, you could enjoy the series. If you can really, really aggressively, like, separate the show from the comic book, you might enjoy it. If you're a huge fan of the comic book, you're probably going to hate the show, honestly. Unless a lot of stuff changes in the second episode, which it doesn't look like they're going to. It looks like they're going to. In fact, Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg confirmed as such that they're going to stay in that town for a little while, which means they're just ignoring a central premise of the entire comic book series, which is whatever. Like I said, I'm gonna watch the second episode, which is on tonight. It's on the night that this episode is going to be going up. I'm gonna give it a couple more episodes. I'm gonna try and enjoy it on its own terms. I'm still really frustrated about it. I was furious the night it aired. Also, just a couple, details that, some good details. It was a really funny moment where Tom Cruise explodes. This is all these religious leaders that Genesis, like, possesses before it gets to Jesse. There's a guy in Africa, which a lot of people were tweeting about. Some Black Nerd Girl on Twitter, a couple other, African American Black oriented nerd Twitter accounts were just like, so yeah, you have Kansas, Texas, and then when they get to Africa, it's just Africa. Like, not a place in Africa, just generally Africa, which I think is partially what worries me about changing the race of Tulip, is just like, you have two people in Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg and maybe a couple other writers who they've already kind of fucked this up, like, which is like, okay, so the places in America are specific, but all the places where white people are specific. Even in Russia, I mean, it's not specifically, they could have said Moscow, but it was like Russia. But when they get Africa, it's just Africa, and that just, so basically you didn't care enough, or you don't know enough about Africa to actually specify that a country in Africa, because Africa's a fucking Africa's a fucking continent, guys. Like, there's a lot of places that could be, and the fact that, like, I understand that's the intro of the show, but it's just like, really, like, you had a specific joke or a specific place in the other parts of the show, but you just went Africa. That doesn't bode well for dealing with. It's a red flag to dealing with race in any other part of the show in the future. It's just like, that's doesn't bode well for the future especially when you change the race of one of the characters from the comic book. Which again, I need to emphasize, I am I don't have a problem with. I am worried about it because I don't know that, like, as Scott Woods brought up, which I didn't even think about it, and then he brought it up, and I was like, okay, no, now I'm actually genuinely concerned about this. They're that's gonna go badly, that decision, and if they try to address it, I don't trust that they'll do it well. Also, just the scene with Cassidy was in the airplane was very cool. Cassidy is Cassidy in this. Like that is Cassidy. That's the character. That is who he is. He's hilarious. That they did get. I mean, some of the things about his backstory, it seems like they're fudging for the purposes of what they want to do with the show. But they got him right. The only time Jesse is actually Jesse, I think, is the moment where he's fighting the dudes in the bar. And that, I literally, like, tweeted during that moment, was like, that's my Jesse. That's Jesse there. That, like, the smile he throws when he's fighting, that's who Jesse Custer is. But, and that scene was very cool, too. That was very, like, okay, now I feel like I'm watching an adaptation and not just two people decided to take the name of something and the names of the characters from something and do whatever the fuck they wanted with. Which is really the impression I'm getting. I'm starting to really come down on. I don't know. We'll see how I feel after the second episode, and I will talk about this next week. Also going to talk about next week the Flash finale, which has now spaced out, which I also have. I actually thought was pretty great. The short version, I also had problems with that. Some other details that I really have a problem with. Again, not normally stuff I would be upset about changing details. It's just some of these details are things they changed, and it changes the arc of the characters, and it kind of changes fundamentally for me some of the story, and also means that there's parts of the comic books that we're now we're never going to see. Number one, Jesse's father was not a fucking preacher. He was a Marine. That's actually the fact that he was a Marine and that he served. Of course, they pushed it forward in the comic books. It was Vietnam. In this one, it's not going to be Vietnam because they pushed a lot of things forward in the comic books. Arseface, spoiler, shot himself in the face after hearing about Kurt Cobain and messed it up, and that's why he looks like he does. In this, they've updated it, and they've clearly changed it that it's like he listens to gangster rap, which, again, I have some, not changing it to rap, but it's just like, okay, but then how are you going to handle why he shot himself? It just seems like a detail. It's like, that seems like, it didn't have to be Nirvana, Kurt Cobain. That's not what I'm saying. It's just like there's certain things that seem like tropey. Like that decision seems tropey. It's like, well, then how are you going to understand? Like, I don't know. And also having Root be a character in the town, even though he's not from that town. There's a whole thing about who Jesse's father was and why breaking the promise that he says he broke the promise to his father, making his father a preacher, although his father could have still been a Marine who became a preacher, seems really problematic for me. It just seems like it just seems like you change that for a reason that doesn't make any sense, and now you don't have the backstory of how. Maybe you don't have the backstory. I don't know. It seems like you're throwing away a lot of stuff from the book. Again, it's just a pilot, so maybe they'll get to this in later episodes. Although, like I said, from what I've heard, they're like, oh, we decided to go in a different direction. And it's just like, well, then why are you... That's my thing. It's like, oh, we decided to go in a different direction. Then why fucking call it Preacher? Why even bother? Like, ugh. Okay. That being said, with the nature of the show where they're like, oh, we can do basically whatever we want, maybe we'll still get those stories. I came away from this first episode in this pilot being very angry and very frustrated, and very reluctant to watch the second episode. Although I had some interesting conversations with some other Preacher fans, one in particular that I'm gonna have to tag. I don't have his Twitter account up right now, but I'll probably tag him in this too, or her, who's also a Preacher fan who liked it. And I was like, "Can you explain to me why? Because I'm having trouble. I'm having a lot of trouble." He's like, "Well, there's a lot of potential here that they could still do stuff from the comic books. It's only the first episode. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff here." I was like, "Okay, fair." So I'm gonna give it a couple more episodes. I'm gonna see what happens. I'm gonna watch it tonight. I'll report back to you guys next week about the first episode. Come out to the show on the 24th. Let me know what you thought of the pilot on Twitter, or in the comments for the comments for this. Subscribe on iTunes. Sorry about the really long, not really long, only about a half hour, but like a half hour solo episode where all I do is rant angrily. I wasn't expecting to rant angrily. I was like, let me watch it again and give myself a week, and I will be more composed about this. And no, apparently I'm still angry. So I'm gonna go watch the second episode, and I will report back, and I will tag people, and yeah. I don't know, man. I don't know, people. Make your own decisions. Let me know what you think. Hit us up on Twitter at NerdProQuo on Twitter, and let us know if you watched the Preacher premiere and you liked it. If you didn't like it, let me know. I want to have a discussion about this, and I will be live tweeting the second episode. Although this podcast will probably go up while the second episode is airing. So yeah, let me know what you think. Come to the show on the 24th out here in Brooklyn if you can. And yeah, make your own decisions. Stay nerdy.